Welcome to IFO Talks. With me is Joseph Olmert again. He is one of the leading experts on the region. He has fought in the Yom Kippur War, and he is a professor on the Middle East. Welcome, Joseph.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Not at all, Joseph. Joseph, today let's make sense of all that's going on. We have seen tensions rise between Israel and Hezbollah. There was a strike in the Golan Heights, and many members of the Jews community, in fact, many children died. Israel blames Hezbollah. Hezbollah denies that it is responsible. Tensions are bubbling. And this is also a time when Bibi Netanyahu, or rather Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has visited the US. This visit hasn't gone as well as some of the visits in the past. So paint us a picture, sir.
Well, let's start with Hezbollah. They murdered the children and Israeli citizens, Israelis. And nobody really takes seriously their denial, even in Lebanon, everybody makes fun of that. And that's not really an issue here. The US government and others accepted, of course, the Israeli version. Look, there's a lot of tension right now as we talk. There can be something happening, so we have to watch the news while we talk. The Israelis vow strong retaliation. As of now, in the last 48 hours, what the Israeli military did was kind of type of what I would call softening attacks. They are targeting specific locations of Hezbollah, but this is far from being what they consider would be the retaliation. And the air of suspense and tension may work in the benefit of Israel in the sense that it could still use a surprise strike when Hezbollah is not exactly ready for it, because as time goes on, the idea might be that, well, the Israelis just talk and nothing happens. But I don't think that in terms of Israeli politics and domestic politics, and that will also lead me to the question about Netanyahu's visit, that Netanyahu can afford not to have a very serious strike. He will be in deep, 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 deep trouble if he doesn't. So I believe that that is going to happen. And then, of course, it will be up to Hezbollah as to how to react. I think that this situation is so dangerous for another reason, and we have to be honest about it. Until now, all this fighting between the two sides was with Hezbollah using a lot of stuff that the Israelis consider to be very heavy, very significant, whereas the Israelis did not use what Hezbollah should consider very significant Israeli weapons. And I would not like to go too much into that, but just to indicate that if indeed, which is a big if, the Israeli strike will be as formidable as is presumed to be, Hezbollah might be very much surprised by what is going to happen. But that is just a supposition, based on the assessment of the situation. Now, you asked me about the visit in the US. I need to tell you, Atul, on when was it? 2015, Netanyahu came to a visit that was already then deemed controversial. So I wrote 2 months ahead of the visit an article saying he should not go, because I said, don't get this gift from the Republicans. It's a biting gift, And I predicted, to say it like this, I told you so, but I predicted exactly what would happen. And what happened was that the speech had nothing to do with what would be later on the Obama administration decision about the Iran nuclear deal, which he went along with and did, much to the chagrin of the Israelis. And Netanyahu aggravated the crisis with the Democratic Party. He did not create it, he aggravated it. Now, you asked me about this speech, even worse. Who even remembers he was there? It had no impact in the US. The Republicans liked it. The Democrats did not. Big surprise. Public opinion hardly paid any attention. Even the demonstrations against the speech were very small. contrasted with what was the expectation of who knows what. And altogether, therefore, the speech had nothing to do with anything useful and beneficial for Israel. And therefore, it was a failure. It is as simple as that. Now, if he pulled up a couple of points in Israeli public opinion polls, so who cares? In the meantime, came the Hezbollah attack, and that's the only story that people talk about in Israel now. That's the news. So really, it was an unnecessary exercise of Netanyahu trying to reassert himself personally as the leader, as the great speaker. Let me tell you something. He's a great speaker. So what? And what really makes me laugh sometimes is the comparisons to Churchill. I think that I mentioned in another program here, I did my PhD on Churchill and de Gaulle in the Second World War. So I know something about Churchill. Churchill gave the speech and then he did. Netanyahu came, talked, and went. That's what happened.
So let's take a step back. Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, came during the middle of an election season, came at a time when there's a new presidential candidate, when most congressmen are busy with their re-election. The question is, why? Why was he even here?
To score points in Israel. That's as simple as that. Look, he's a brilliant speaker. There's no question about that.
So the optics of him speaking on Capitol Hill would help him.
The optics of him being welcomed enthusiastically by the Republicans and about 1/3 to 1/2 of the Democrats. Look, there were many Democrats who boycotted, many did come and accepted him nicely. The point about a speech like that is, so what's the outcome? Well, what is the end game? What do you want to achieve? I don't see that he achieved anything. I don't see any change in American public opinion, which, by the way, American public opinion by and large is pro-Israel, but according to all polls show it. So it didn't change anything. And Americans are busy now with the presidential race, it's also summer. And, seriously, I know that those who are strong pro-Israel, and I consider, I'm pro-Israel, of course, would say, what is he talking about, this guy? It was a great speech. Okay, so it was a great speech. So what? Speeches are not enough to change political realities or to reframe them. They can do that only if the speech led to actions that then change realities. And this speech had nothing to do with it. So you ask me, the question is, why did he go now? He was invited, he went.
Okay, so much so for that. Now, what do you think is the rationale of the Hezbollah strike? Because Hezbollah has been conducting strikes in northern Israel. There have been forest fires. People have been evacuated. Israel has hit back too. The tension has been simmering, but it has been at a lower temperature than today. And Israel, by accounts of many military experts, you included, has been overextended in Gaza. A two-front war for Israel isn't much fun. It's not going to be fun for Hezbollah either. But the point is, it's not in Israeli strategic interest necessarily to have a two-front war. So what is Hezbollah's calculation in provoking a war which will neither be good for itself nor for Israel?
Well, the question really is whether Hezbollah knew a minute before the rocket was launched what would be the outcome of it and what would be then the reaction. That I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it in order to exonerate them, God forbid, not at all. They
didn't fare very well in the last war. We discussed that.
Well, they fared well or not, it's a question of opinion, but they did kill citizens and children in a football game, in a football field. And whether they aimed it to be like that or not, it's immaterial anymore because the outcome is what matters. But here is the bigger picture here. That comes back to your question because you asked me a more strategic question. Look, yes, Israel is overextended, but don't forget that Israel is overextended when it comes to ground forces. I don't think that the Israeli war plan about Hezbollah are about taking over ground. They are about inflicting such a damage to Hezbollah wherever it matters to Hezbollah that they will have to rethink their activities, exactly as Nasser said after 2006, and he said it, if I knew what would be the outcome of the war, I would not have started it. He said it. So the problem for Israel is, yes, the current timing is not convenient. Agreed. However, if the war or the hostilities until now between Israel and Hezbollah will end as they are now, that's a defeat to Israel. And I'll tell you why. It's a defeat to Israel because Hezbollah can claim, hey, look, we deterred Israel from a big war against us, and we created a new strategic equation whereby the Israelis are not free anymore to attack Palestinians in Gaza or West Bank or Judea and Samaria, because we might react. And if not we, only also the Houthis and others. And that's a very bad strategic equation for Israel. So then you ask yourself a question, okay, but you still can't do it now. Why won't you delay it for the future? The problem really is that who knows what will happen in the future? The situation might get even worse for Israel. So the timing now is very crucial. If indeed Hezbollah made this mistake and would force Israel to retaliate, the Israelis will have to do something very significant and put the ball back in the court of Hezbollah. Let Hezbollah decide what they want to do. Let Hezbollah understand that the game cannot go on like that. Because, okay, you can say, you know what, it happened, it's a tragic mistake by Hezbollah, maybe we should not be so tough. Tomorrow it can happen again. So politically and strategically, Israel cannot afford not to react strongly. How to do it in a way that would not unleash a big war, that will be a decision for Hezbollah. Until now, the decision was for Israel all the time. How to react as if not to create a big war. And when you are a side that has all the time to fear that if you react, there will be a big war, you are deterred. And the question of deterrence here, Atul, is very significant. Because that will affect the behavior of the two sides later on. So this is definitely a very decisive moment right now.
So what happens now?
I don't know. The Israelis say they're going to react. Hopefully they will react in a way that will not unleash a general war with Hezbollah, but we'll see. And it's also a question of images, perceptions. What will be the perception after the Israeli retaliation? After the Israeli retaliation in Iran, the perception was Israel was muted. The perception after the Israeli retaliation against the Houthis was the opposite. I mean, the Houthis see what's happening over there. I mean, they were, they got their lesson, again, they might do these things and they will, but they got something that nobody expected. So the perception was here, it was strong. We'll see what the perception is. Look, perceptions are part of war, as we all know. The images, the senses that you take with it. In Lebanon, by the way, there is strong public opinion against Hezbollah. And Hezbollah needs to take it into account. Not because Hezbollah should be afraid that while the Israelis attack, there will be 10 or 20,000 Christians or Druze that will fight against Hezbollah in the back of, stab them in the back. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is that Hezbollah is accepted now as an extension of Iran in Lebanon. And even if they will survive this round of hostilities with Israel, the Lebanese are not going to accept for long that their country will be basically occupied by proxy of Iran. And, you can say today, it may not happen immediately, but maybe in 6 months' time it will happen. Then you will remember it was said, the Lebanese are not going to accept it. And Hezbollah has to realize they might lose their grip over Lebanon. So they will have a problem now. Look, the strategic equation has to change in a way that Hezbollah will be the ones to decide whether we want to continue or not.
Okay, so as of now, what is very interesting is, unlike the time when you fought in the Yom Kippur War, there were state actors acting against Israel.
Yeah.
Egypt, Syria in particular. Today, you have three non-state actors. You have Hamas, which has tied you up for months and has created problems, massive problems for Israel, in particular, maybe not on average when it comes to public opinion, but certainly when it comes to campuses and the young, it has hit Israel's image, not just in the US, but globally. You have the Houthis who've created a massive problem. They've practically blocked the Suez Canal. They've created a problem not just for Israel, but for Europe-Asia trade. And now you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is constantly provoking Israel, but at the same time is also causing massive instability in the region, not just in terms of war between the two, but also in terms of Lebanon. So what has happened that we've gone from states acting against Israel to non-state actors? And remember, two of them are Shia, one of them is Sunni. Hamas is
Well,
Sunni, so they are not
yeah,
not
Hamas
exactly part of the same same Islamic sphere.
Hamas militarily is finished, is destroyed, and whether it's total destruction or 85.6% destruction or 92.2%, Hamas as a military force is basically destroyed. And the way Israel conducted the war in Gaza is a matter for another discussion. There are pros and cons to why they did what they did, but don't forget that even though what may look at the situation in Gaza is of course very tragic to those who were killed, the Arabs and Jews, the damage and all that, Israel used in Gaza weapons that are not what is going to be used in other fronts. And you saw, for example, what happened to the Houthis in Yemen, the Israeli operation
No,
against
tell our viewers that. I do know, but
yeah, the Israeli operation well, okay,
know.
look, the Israeli operation against the Houthis in Yemen was a classic operation that very few militaries can conduct, if at all. Maybe only the Americans can. And if something like that would have been conducted in Gaza after 3 days, there would not have been a war in Gaza. So God forbid. I mean, let's not get into all that, because I'm the last person that want to sound like a warmonger and all this. But you come to Hezbollah and add up to this the Iraqi militias and
Basically,
Iran.
the Houthis, just to break, the operation was very punitive. And struck a lot of Houthi
Look,
militia.
a full squadron of F-35 over your sky, if it was in Gaza for a couple of days, the war would have been ending at that time. But look, now let's get to Hezbollah and we go to Iran. That's the real problem. Look, the real strategic issue for Israel is to make the other side realize what could be the price for them and therefore to be deterred. And we haven't yet achieved it. And I'll be the first to say it. And everybody, by the way, in Israel says it, So the question really is when. You don't choose your time just like that. Opportunities occur. Situations change. Now the Israelis have this dilemma about Hezbollah. The dilemma about Hezbollah is how to do it to Hezbollah in a way that will also send a message to Iran. I mean, I will add up this argument to what I already told you about Israeli considerations. And yes, you are right about that. Look, Israel is not fighting a militia here or a militia there. Israel is fighting Iran. And Iran was allowed to become a huge force. Okay, you know what? People would say, what do you mean was allowed? Iran is a sovereign state, they can do whatever they want. The fact of the matter is that the entire effort of the Western world to contain Iran failed, not just Israel's effort. And the fact of the matter is that the Israelis are saying, and rightly so, look, we fight against Iran, a war that should have been the war of the entire Western world. And that is the dilemma here. We'll see what Trump does if he's elected, which is a big if, which is a very huge if he's elected, Trump, what he's going to do. Fact of the matter is the Western world failed to contain Iran.
Yeah, but there is an argument here in Washington and in London and in Berlin and in all Western capitals. You know that, and I know that very well, that um, Iran is too big a country to invade, unlike Iraq. So containing them is not easy. Either you squeeze and squeeze the regime, and that is the maximum pressure, the sanctions policy, or you have some sort of deal and you bring them into the fold. And it is not an easy strategic dilemma.
Yeah, that's very true. But look, they failed to bring them to the fold with a deal. And squeezing Iran could have started elsewhere. For example, take the Houthis. That's a classic example. The Western world allowed them to do it. And the coalition led by the Saudis failed miserably because what they did to the Houthis was not clinical, was not lethal. It was like local. They attacked us here, we attacked them there. You're talking about a confederation of
I mean,
tribes.
hold fire. The Saudis are militarily incompetent. They may buy
Okay,
arms,
but that's my
but
point.
everyone knows that.
But that's exactly the point. The Saudis were incompetent. Where was the West? I was about to say it. So
here's the question, Joseph. I mean, where was the West? So are you arguing that the West should follow a muscular foreign policy? And by the way, public opinion does not allow for that after Afghanistan and Iraq.
Well, okay. So that may explain why the West did not do it. It still doesn't contradict the fact that the West did not do it. You explain it in a way which is logical, and maybe that's the only significant explanation. But the outcome of that is that it is left only to Israel to do it. And I'll tell you where the risk is. What the risk is. The risk is that you cannot allow a situation. And I'm going to say something very, very important now. You cannot allow the situation to come to a point where the Israelis will feel that they have no other choice but with regard to Iran. And let's stop here. So look,
does that mean a nuclear strike on Tehran?
That doesn't mean anything beyond what I said. Look, here is the point. The point is here that there is an end game. And Israel will not be able to live under the shadow of a constant Iranian threat from the south.
But the shadow of Iran is very useful for Bibi Netanyahu. He's able to pose as the savior of Israel.
That's true.
It is in the interest of certain political leaders to constantly paint the specter of Iran to legitimize their rule.
Yes, but that is over. I'll tell you why. Because he said it for 15 years. People are tired of listening to it. And by the way, if you remember the speech in Congress, he devoted
with the image of the bomb and
But this speech, and I wrote about that in my Facebook page, he devoted to Iran only the last part, few minutes of his speech, and it was like almost like anticlimax, And look, on the question of Iran, there is no debate in Israel.
Understood.
So all I'm saying is there is to be the calculation of an end game. And there has to be another calculation, how to play the time to that end game. The West wants to play by not doing anything to contain. And Israel, under Netanyahu, adopted it with regard to Hamas, see what happened. Adopted it with regard to Hezbollah, see what happened. So we'll see.
So you've talked about Hamas, you've talked about Hezbollah, you've talked about Houthis. Let's paint a picture of the Druze. This community, 20,000 strong in Israel, is divided between
100. In Israel, there are 180,000.
180,000, I stand corrected. But anyway, they are in both Israel and Syria. 80% of the men, from what I read, serve in the Israeli army. They are a small sect which began in Egypt and is regarded as a combination of Shia Islam as well as some other ancient traditions.
They're not, look, they're not Muslims anymore, because the
Got it.
definition of being Muslim is if you accept Muhammad is the last prophet, and they have a different theology here. But look,
Yeah, but hold fire. Uh, they have been loyal to Israel, but
well,
since 2018, from what I'm told by my Israeli friends, um, they tell me that Netanyahu's government passed a law codifying Israel as solely the nation state of the Jewish people, and the
well, which
Druze.
which this, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, but the Druze wanted to have a specific reference referring to them
To them
as,
because
yeah, and
they
that
see
was not.
Israel as a refuge in that region, as
No, no,
perhaps,
well, not exactly to term it in these words, but to give them a special status,
yeah,
which was not given to them in this law, and it should have been or can still be done. The Netanyahu government disappointed many Israelis, not just Druze, but look, the
yeah.
behavior of
Walid
the.
Jumlat, the leader,
I'll
the
come to
Druze
it.
leader, has proposed Palestinian rights, and I
Yeah,
forgot to
I'll, I'll,
mention
I'll
that the
come. I'll
Druze are
come.
also in Lebanon.
I'll come to that. I'll come
Yeah,
to that. And I'll tell you about Jumblat also. So,
yeah,
we have dealt with Jumblat for many, many years. So it's not new.
exactly. He's an old man now.
Yeah, but Jumblat said during the siege on Beirut in 1982 to Arafat, it's not your Stalingrad, leave, and attacked Israel for whatever. And behind closed doors, Israelis were meeting with him in his palace in Muhtara, his village, But let's
Mm,
let's leave Jumblat aside here. It's
mm,
complicated even without him. Look, the Druze in this war are
yeah,
fighting as loyally as always, and there's
yeah.
no question about the loyalty to Israel now. The problem really is that the Druze in this particular enclave in the Golanites, for 4 Druze villages, one of them is this place, Majd al-Shams,
Mhm.
they've always been on the other side of the border with Syria where there are other Druze. So they feel like, so the reaction, by the way, in Majd al-Shams is very interesting. They basically almost like chased out Netanyahu from the visit, but claiming that he hasn't done enough to protect them. So when you talk about how to protect them, you can say only defense, it can also be attack and all that. Look, the problem of the Druze community is that they are spread between 3 countries, and because of this sense of being a persecuted religious minority during their history, they have to be very, very careful. And Jumblat, that you mentioned, is a typical example of Druze diplomacy, which is brilliant. He is an ally of Hezbollah who basically tells them all the time, don't do what you want to do because you play to the ends of Israel. So it sounds like he's anti-Israel because he says Israelis are looking for the opportunity, but he basically says to Hezbollah, leave it. It's not your business to deal with them. So it's a double game, that being understood, and I have no problem in understanding them. I need to tell you that I've been always very connected with the Druze community in Israel. I don't want to say my
Do
best.
you go drinking with Walid Jumlat?
Not with, no, in Israel, I said, in Israel. But I also met Lebanese Druze. But look, uh, coming back to where we started, because it is all like, one circle here, the Israeli reaction to what happened with the Druze, for example, in Syria. I don't know if you remember it, during the Syrian civil war, there's this big Druze village on the other side of the
Yes,
border,
exactly.
that when there was an attack by ISIS, the Israeli army did what they had to do. There were supplies, there were threats, and the Druze survived it. So that is here, a very
And and
delicate.
and the Druze ended up supporting Bashar al-Assad regime. They
No,
made a
they are
deal with him.
today,
No?
no, but that's
Okay.
today the Druze population in the south of Syria is in a state of political rebellion against Bashar Assad.
I see.
Political still. That could become violent. And
Hmm.
oh yeah, there's a huge problem there. There's a huge, huge problem. I wrote an article a few years ago about what happened until 2018 or so, or 19. I need to add up to this.
So
There's a
could
big
Israel
problem.
expand and include Druze
No,
territory
I
in
would
Syria?
say Israel can but should not.
I see.
So you got a specific answer, you see. You know, I always say, I'll tell you something. I always say to spokespeople, you do your job properly.
Yeah.
If your answer to a question, close the chapter on the question rather than opening up to 10 more questions. So yes, Israel can, but should not, period.
Excellent. So the Druze community is disappointed with Bibi Netanyahu. A lot of others, as you've said, are disappointed. What
Yeah.
happens to his future? I mean, he's got more
Uh,
lives than a
yeah.
cat.
There will be elections at one point in time, and we
Mm.
shall see the results. I mean, you know, right now, all the polls indicate that Likud are losing between 1/3 to 40% of their power.
So just like
And
the Tory party in the
well,
UK.
not really, because in Israel, the polls always give Likud less than what they end up with in the end, you know.
Okay. And you have
Uh,
proportional representation. You don't
and
have
there's
first past the
proportional
post system.
representation, you know.
Yeah.
By the way, when you look at the results in England, you see the pros and cons of the constituency system, first past the post. The
Yeah.
Labour Party, I believe, got less percentage than before, but they are much more in seats.
So Labour got 33.8% of the vote.
Yeah.
They got less than 10 million votes, but they ended up with 411 seats.
Yeah, it's because
The just a
Nigel
second,
Farage, yeah,
The
yeah,
Liberal Democrats won a smaller percentage than
and got
Reform.
71 seats as opposed to 11.
Yeah,
All right,
72.
salute.
So
Nigel
and Reform
Farage,
just got 4.
yeah, Nigel Farage killed the Conservatives, didn't help himself, but he killed them. Okay, look, but
No,
that's
no,
another.
he helped himself. He's now in Parliament, Joseph.
Yeah, I
He's got a
know,
big
but
platform.
okay. There are 650 members in Parliament, you know. You
Yeah,
know.
but he's the loudest and he's the most charismatic.
He is the loudest, you know. Also, Itamar Ben-Gvir, unfortunately, is the loudest in Israel. That's not good news to me.
It may not be, but
Yeah.
what happens in Israel? So Likud will still be a major party, but do you think will it get rid of Bibi Netanyahu? Because what is unreported quite often is that Bibi has destroyed other
Yeah.
leaders in the Likud. Some of them were
Everybody
towering
destroyed, yeah.
leaders.
It
Yeah.
destroyed everybody. The only two people today, three people in today in Likud that could somehow challenge him are the former mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, who is the minister
Mm,
of the economy, who is adopting now a very extreme hawkish line. You know, he attacks him from the right. The
mm.
other one is Yuli Edelstein, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee of the Knesset, who is right of Netanyahu, but kind of in a responsible way. And the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who is not clear whether he's right of Netanyahu, left of Netanyahu, but personally, the two people can't bear each other's company, you know. So, yeah. But look,
So
Netanyahu would really.
civil war in Likud
Oh yeah, but the
once
Likud has always
elections
said,
finish.
yeah, Likud has always said civil wars, but they knew how to coalesce before elections. The problem
Mm,
really now for Netanyahu is that he might be challenged by another threat, politically threat, and this is the possibility, which is so, of establishing a right-wing party that will challenge him with Lieberman, who in the polls is shooting up, and Gideon Saar and Naftali Bennett, and maybe some other people. On the one hand, they might take votes from him. They might also take votes from Gantz and Lapid, but Ben-Gvir is going to take votes from him from the extreme right. So you ask me, if I were to bet on elections in Israel tomorrow morning, Netanyahu is finished. Any other time, as they say, God is great, Allahu Akbar. I mean, who knows?
In a nutshell, Israel is going to strike Hezbollah and strike Hezbollah hard. There is danger of a war, but war is not necessarily imminent. Israel has already struck the Houthis with a squadron of F-35s. That is a template for Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Israel is going to act at some point to do something against Iran, given the specter it faces, the threat it faces from Iran. And when it comes to Bibi Netanyahu, if the election comes tomorrow, he is dead man walking.
Tomorrow, yeah. But just
Yes.
to give you my summation of all that, Israel is under attack by Iran and all kinds of fronts, and it defends itself. And yes, the outcome might be conflicts, and it is not a very encouraging, perspective for the future. But what's interesting, by the way, I need to tell you that, and there must be some more serious discussion about that. I'm not the right person to do it necessarily. The Israeli economy is still very strong and stable. The foreign currency reserves are huge, and there is no real. Yeah, there are talks about problems in the high-tech industry on the one hand. On the other hand, there are already talks about recovery of it. So we'll see what happens. I mean, Israel is bleeding, but when you look at the situation, when you have a war, Houthis with the Iraqi militias, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, and Iran on top of all that, one has, I believe, to appreciate the overall strengths of the Israeli state, and despite also the domestic issues. So I mean, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens, and we shall
Uh,
have more talks, I'm sure, because
so
the situation will require it.
in the context of the war, the economy is doing all right. Now,
Well, yeah. Sorry.
before we wrap up,
Yeah. I don't know if it
please,
doing all right. It does much better than the dire
it's
prediction.
proving to be resilient.
It's resilient. Exactly. That's the word. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Now, before we wrap this up, we have to talk a little bit about Lebanon. Lebanon, in many ways, is a failed state. It's ethnically divided. It has a dysfunctional government. In any case, it was a creation of Sykes-Picot, as were many of the states in the Middle East. They are not exactly cohesive units. Lines on the map have lumped together various tribes, various ethnicities into arbitrary borders, and frankly, structures that didn't quite evolve, were imposed by colonial powers, and once they've left, don't quite make sense. So the instability in Lebanon is a matter of worry for Israel. Some would argue it is a direct product of the Israeli intervention in 1980-82.
I would argue it's a direct result of what you said until now, which has nothing to do with Israel. Why Lebanon
We
was
can blame the
created.
British and the French. But
let
me
tell you something, because that's my field.
Joseph, let me just quickly wrap this point up. But the point is, Lebanon is not coherent or cohesive anymore, and Hezbollah is the only functioning institution in some ways. So what happens there now? Please, over to you.
Well, I referred to it before when I told you that Hezbollah has to bear in mind the ability of the possibility from their perspective, or the danger that if they start a full-fledged war with Israel, they would lose their grip over Lebanon. But look, Lebanon was created by the French, the famous declaration in the 1st of September 1920. There was no Israel at that time, so let's leave Israel aside. But bear in mind one thing, you have to remember it. Look, at that time, 54% of the population in Lebanon were Christians.
Absolutely.
And the Maronite Catholics were the main element of them. This was
part of the excuse for the French to intervene against the Ottoman Empire was to defend Christendom.
Sure, but that was their historic homeland. Yeah. And now there are many more Maronites outside of Lebanon than in Lebanon. In Brazil alone, you have more Maronites than in Lebanon. And that's a tragedy, which is the overall tragedy of Christians in the Middle East. Let's face it. Where are the Assyrians of Iraq? Where are the Chaldeans of Iraq? And I can go on and on and on and on and on. So Lebanon, in that case,
even in Jordan, if you're Christian, there is an element of fear.
It's good you mentioned that. Only 5% of the population, but Jordan might. By the way, it's a little bit different because
it's much better than the others.
Yeah, the kingdom also relies on other minorities, the Cherkessians and others, and basically the Bedouins and so on, But look, but that is the Middle East, my friend. And you talked before, you gave a brilliant summation of the problems of the Middle East. I think you can give a course about that. But what do you want from Israel? Lebanon, civil war of Lebanon, 1840 to 1860. I'll tell you a funny story about that. Way back. Talked in Toledo, Ohio about the situation. And Toledo is a large Arab population. So Arabs
Yes,
came.
I've been to Toledo.
Okay, and one of them said to me, well, Israel is responsible for the Lebanese civil war as of 1840. I said, but Israel was established only in 1948. Never mind, Israel is responsible. Okay.
The Jews, he must have meant.
So let's put it was, by the way, in a friendly way, not violent. Today it would have been violent. So let's put it in perspective. But anyway, it's always a pleasure, Atul. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
a great conversation. Lebanon will persist in a state of flux. And if Israel acts, then Israel will do.
Lebanon in its normal situation of instability.
Exactly. And if Israel acts, then Hezbollah loses grip, just as Hamas has lost grip.
It can happen, and Hezbollah has to bear it in mind as a possibility, but it's all iffy on all sides.
All right. So what happens now? It's an iffy world, and it is what Pentagon calls volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous VUCA. So welcome to the VUCA world.
We don't know what's going to happen, but we talk about that in nice words.
Exactly. And if we want to go by ancient Indian philosophy, there's a Sanskrit phrase, Yadam Jivet, Sukham Jivet, Rinam Kritva, Gritam Pivet. If you want to take that route, what that really means is as long as you live happily, take a lot of debt and drink ghee. The Greeks, the Italians, and the French seem to be adhering to that philosophy. So could you?
Well, look, the world is becoming ruled by Indians now. Britain had the prime minister. America would have a semi-Indian president. What do you want? It might be the dominant ideology, and maybe for good, for the better of the world.
Thank you, Joseph. Always a pleasure.
Take care. Enjoy it. You too. Bye-bye. Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.